They had a young woman bound to a chair, her face bruised, blood dripping down as they mocked her. They thought she was insignificant, just another nobody. But when the room's doors swung open and the commanding officer stepped in, everything came to a halt. She wasn't just anyone. She was on a covert mission to uncover corruption deep inside the force. What happens next will leave you speechless. A young woman sat in the middle of a dull, gray interrogation room, hands tightly bound behind her back with coarse rope. Blood stained her clothes, the dark red streaks running from her forehead down her cheek. She hadn't moved in hours. Her name? Arya Grant. She remained silent. Not when they yelled at her, not when they cursed, and not even when the slap came so fast her head whipped to the side. Arya didn't flinch. She just sat still, breathing slowly. 3 officers surrounded her. One of them, Sergeant Greg Hall, stood the closest, his boots heavy against the cold tile floor. He was older, hardened, and carried himself like he owned the room. "You think staying quiet is going to save you?" Greg barked, his finger jabbed toward Arya's face. "You all act like victims, but I know what you've done." No reaction from Arya. Behind him, 2 younger officers, James Wells and Mark Chase, leaned against the wall with crossed arms, eyes locked on Arya like she was a caged animal. James chuckled softly. Maybe she can't talk, all that attitude choking her words. Greg paced around her, circling her like a predator eyeing its prey. "You were at that warehouse, weren't you? You matched the description perfectly. What were you doing there, huh? Running a drug deal? Scouting for your gang?" Silence. Arya didn't answer. With a growl, Greg slammed his fist onto the table, the sound ringing throughout the room. "I said talk." Arya's eyes lifted slowly, calm but intense. It only seemed to ignite Greg's anger further. He slapped her again, harder this time. Blood splattered as her hair swung from the force. She didn't utter a word. Outside the room, 2 other officers stood, chatting casually by the door. "She's been in there for hours." Not a word. "They never talk," one officer remarked, sipping his coffee. Inside, Greg kept up his pacing. "We found your phone by the alley. No ID. Dressed like some street thug. Who are you working with?" Arya remained silent. With a swift movement, Greg kicked the chair backward, sending Arya crashing to the floor. She groaned as her shoulders slammed against the cold ground. Greg bent down, his face twisted in rage. "You're not leaving this place until you talk," he threatened. "You're nothing, just another nobody from the streets." Arya looked up at him, her gaze unwavering, still silent. Something in her eyes shifted, but she still didn't speak. They hoisted her back up, tying her even tighter. Mar placed a file on the table with a loud thud. "It says here your name is Arya. No last name. What's the game, huh? You think you can play us?" Greg's voice was dripping with contempt. "Just some street rat caught in the wrong place," Greg added with a laugh. "Let's keep her in here overnight. Maybe the darkness will break her." The 3 officers laughed, their laughter echoing in the empty room, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The door suddenly swung open, and a tall man walked in, his polished boots echoing on the floor. His suit was sharp, his badge reading Captain Lucas Darnell. He froze when he saw Arya, his face draining of color. "Arya?" His voice was barely a whisper. The room fell into stunned silence. Greg frowned. "You know her?" Captain Darnell didn't respond. He hurried to Arya, quickly untied her hands, and gently lifted her chin with shaking fingers. "Dear God," he muttered, "what did they do to you?" Finally, Arya spoke, her voice cold and cutting. "Took you long enough, Captain." The room spun. Greg stepped back. "Wait, she's your—" Arya slowly got to her feet, her wrists raw from the ropes. She stood tall, defiant, looking at them all. "No," she said firmly. "I'm your reckoning." Captain Darnell took a deep breath. "I didn't know. They told me it was just a suspect. I signed off on the assignment." Arya wiped the blood from her eye. "Undercover. I was sent to investigate internal corruption. This unit is rotten to the core." Captain Darnell was speechless, his face pale with shock. "But you're not a suspect." "I'm a federal agent," Arya said, her voice sharp. "Internal affairs. Special investigator. I'm here to take down every officer abusing their power in this district." Greg couldn't control his anger any longer. "No way. This is some sort of trick. You're just a criminal." "Shut up, Greg," Captain Darnell barked, suddenly furious. "You laid hands on my daughter. You tied up a federal agent. It's over for you." Arya turned to face the men in the room, eyes cold with resolve. "Effective immediately, every officer in this room is suspended, disarmed, and under federal investigation. Hand over your badges and weapons." Captain Darnell added in a low, firm voice. You heard her. The officers stood motionless, their badges and weapons clattering onto the table, the air thick with defeat. The screen faded to black. The silence was deafening. The officers who had once mocked Arya were now standing still, pale, their pride shattered. Arya, despite the bruises, stood taller than ever, her presence commanding respect. Captain Darnell stood beside her, still trembling with disbelief. He had failed his own daughter, and now she had come to clean up the mess he ignored. "You failed them," Arya said softly, her eyes on the framed photos of fallen officers lining the wall. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "And you showed me the truth in the hardest way." They didn't embrace, but stood together, equal. A few months later, Arya led a new task force called Project Reclaim, a team built from individuals who had been wrongfully treated by the system, each driven by their own story of corruption. Together, they sought to bring justice where it had long been missing. When asked in an interview what gave her the strength to continue, Arya simply said, "Because they laughed when I bled, but I didn't bleed alone. I bled for every voice they tried to silence." The final scene shows Arya standing on stage in a school auditorium filled with young students. She holds no weapon, no badge, but she carries the truth. Don't let someone with a badge scare you into silence. Learn your rights. Speak the truth. Stand tall, because sometimes justice doesn't come from above. Sometimes it comes from you. As the final echoes of Arya's words lingered in the air, the weight of her journey was clear. What began as an undercover investigation quickly turned into a battle for justice, not just for her, but for every person crushed under the weight of an unjust system. Arya's fight was personal, yet it mirrored the struggles of so many others who had silently endured corruption, abuse of power, and the disregard of their voices. When the badges fell and the weapons hit the table, it was more than just the end of a case. It was the beginning of a much larger movement. Captain Darnell, once blind to the rot within his own department, was now standing alongside Arya, his understanding of justice reshaped. His shame was palpable, yet there was something powerful in that moment. The realization that even those who had failed could still rise to the occasion. In her strength, Arya didn't just expose the flaws of the system. She reminded everyone in that room, and everyone watching, that redemption is possible, but only if you face the truth, however painful it might be. But the battle didn't end with the downfall of a few corrupt officers. Arya didn't stop when the cameras were off or when the headlines faded. She moved forward with an unrelenting purpose. Arya became the beacon of change, assembling a team of individuals who knew firsthand what it meant to suffer from a broken system. Together, they formed Project Reclaim, a task force focused on auditing and reforming precincts nationwide. Arya knew that real change required more than just exposing wrongdoers. It required dismantling the entire system that allowed it to thrive. Her message wasn't just about punishment. It was about accountability, transparency, and justice for all, no matter who you are or where you come from. Learn the law. Speak the truth. Stand tall. These weren't just words to her. They were a call to action. Arya understood that the fight for justice wasn't just about what happened in those dark interrogation rooms. It was about ensuring that the future was different. It was about empowering those who had been silenced and giving them the tools to stand up for themselves. The final scene, where Arya stands before a room full of young faces, shows exactly what her journey was about: passing the torch. The next generation would be equipped not just with knowledge, but with the courage to make their own voices heard. The badge in her pocket wasn't just a symbol of authority, it was a symbol of responsibility. The future was now in their hands, and Arya had shown them that change starts with a single step. It begins with standing up when others expect you to remain silent. In the end, Arya Grant wasn't just a hero. She was a movement, a living testament to the power of one individual's courage to change the world. And as the screen fades to black, it leaves us with a question. Will you stand tall when justice calls you?